You're fat and ugly, and I bet you never get laid. You're a liar, and you're only saying this because you hate women. Your argument, you're basically saying that you want to kill all the Jews. You're either a feminist or you're an asshole. And you're not a real Republican. And you're too stupid to understand what I'm talking about. Or, you're saying these things that don't make any sense. And your argument is stupid. And if you continue saying this, I'm going to unfriend you. So sophistry. Sophistry is what I want to talk about. Sophistry is something that I've talked a lot about in this channel because it's something I care a lot about. I care a lot about logic. I am a musician. I am a writer, but part of my education has been philosophy, and I value that part of my education tremendously, especially the time I've spent studying ethics, ethical systems, as well as logic and general philosophy. So why do people use sophistry so much? The answer is because it works. And that would be like the aphorism of this particular video. Sophistry works. That's why people use it. And it's used in two different effects. The first effect is you attack somebody who is saying something you don't like. I'm using you in I know this is not like the best use of the word you, kind of like how it's not a great use of the word we. If I use we, but if you are the sophist, imagine you're the sophist, you are going to attack a person who's saying something you don't like. And the first goal, there's two goals here. First goal is to get that person who's saying something you don't like to stop saying what you don't like. And the way you're going to get them to stop saying what you don't like is to use sophistry. To attack them, to attack their character, to make them feel bad. That's a really big goal of emotional manipulation. If you can emotionally manipulate the person who's saying things that you don't like in such a way that they feel bad, they may withdraw their argument. They may stop trying to put out their perspective. They may stop trying to make their case to anybody else, in which case you have succeeded. You have succeeded in the goal of stopping that person. Then the second way that sophistry works, or the second method of its action, is or the second target of its action are third parties. So if you are attacking a person who's saying something you don't like, you know that there might be third parties who are looking on at that particular exchange, and what you want them to do is to accept your side of your position, whatever it is, not to discover the truth. Remember, I said this before, and this is another good little aphorism. Sophistry, the goal of sophistry is to convince someone you're correct. The goal of philosophy is to determine the truth. It's a means versus ends sort of competition. But you're trying to get those onlookers in that second method to accept your position, either through a similar action that you did with the first one. Like if somebody has a position that's the same as the person you're attacking, they're going to say, well, I don't want that, so I'm just not going to say anything. And then you've been successful. Or there might be an onlooker who says, oh man, God, he's like Hitler, and I don't want it to be like Hitler, so I will vote for Bernie Sanders because Trump is like Hitler, right? And the sophistry has been successful. You have convinced a person to assent to your position without really that much effort. Sophistry is very efficient. If you can cue directly into somebody's emotions are very powerful. If you can cue directly into somebody's emotions and manipulate them, that's going to be a very, very fast and immediate effect versus having to slowly convince somebody through data that your position is correct, or through reasoning, or any of those sorts of methods. So sophistry is very efficient. The other thing about sophistry, about why it works, besides the fact that it's very efficient, and actually before I get to this, let me make one small interjection. There's this idea that floats around that emotions are illogical, and emotions are actually not illogical. And this, there's people who say they're illogical and people who say they don't. We don't need to go through life being stoics, right, and not feeling anything. When emotion is appropriate, it's very logical. Like, you feel fear, You feel fear when you see a tiger that's going to eat you. That's a logical response. The fear motivates you to go do something that will save your life, and you can continue living and passing on your genes. It's a great biological mechanism. Our emotions like love will make you protect your offspring from mortal danger, rather than being like, well, I'm going to let the tiger eat my kid and I'm just going to hightail it out of here. So emotions are not necessarily illogical, but they're powerful. And if you can cause an emotional response that is in the absence of its normal logical stimulus, then you've really performed a tiny little miracle. And that's what we really want to avoid. We want to avoid emotional manipulation, not righteous indignation, but artificial indignation is the goal of the sophist. So anyway, going on to that, why is sophistry so effective? And I said it's, because it's efficient. It's very efficient to cue into somebody's emotions. But more than that, there is a huge portion of people to whom logic, or we don't have to say logic, we could say evidence, reason, all these things that are objectivity, has no real meaning. So to those people, objectivity has no meaning. They will never be convinced by reason and evidence because they either don't understand how to discern what evidence actually is, they have no desire to discern it, or they literally are incapable of being convinced by anything other than emotions. So that's a huge portion of people, and I don't have a ton of evidence to back this up, except I may try to assemble some links to put down below. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I remember seeing a study that basically said if you took evidence to somebody that had a belief that was contrary to their belief, rather than altering their belief, they distrusted the messenger. And if we think about like human biology, right? We have a big in-group, out-group thing kind of built into our genes. We were originally very tribal people, and so there's a need to immediately trust those around us, and things that are external, things that might change our culture. There's going to be a barrier to that, and that's that might be natural to a certain extent. But for those of us who really wish to be objective, that means removing some of those the weight of some of those evolutionary devices and really trying to examine reality and see it for what it is. Does this mean, if there's this huge group of people that are really only convinced by like emotion, does this mean that we need to abandon reason and evidence? And I'm going to say no. And it goes back to the little ends versus means comparison that I made. The goal of sophistry is to convince someone that you're right. The goal of philosophy is to discover the truth. That's an aphorism. Obviously, there's more to both, but let's start with that little that little capsule there. The means of sophistry are all these non-arguments that I've talked about. Now, you can make an actual argument amidst the sophistry, but generally the goal is to avoid doing things that require a lot of effort, or to take the swiftest and most powerful route to convincing someone, and that's going to be an emotional manipulation if you can manage it. Versus philosophy, you have this long process of creating, and like if we look at the scientific method, which a lot of people will correctly argue was born out of the philosophy and theology tradition. You have a hypothesis. You test that hypothesis using objective measurements and well-constructed experiments. Then you determine whether that hypothesis was true, and slowly you begin to distill the truth through lots of experimentation, observation, gathering of evidence. All these things that eventually distill down this nugget. They're like, this, we've proven that this is true. And we could say the goal is the truth, but it's the means that really matters. Because the means are the way to determine that whatever is at the end is actually the truth. Without those means, the end of truth is meaningless. Without the means of rigorous evidence, without the means of logic, without the means of reason, without the means of like the scientific method, then that end goal of discovering the truth has no meaning. We can't know it's the truth. The means are what creates the truth. The means are what really matters. So with a sophist, the means are the opposite. They're illogic. And because most of them are lies, I'm going to say that they're actually immoral. Now, morality is relative, right? And I mean, not all things are equally evil. We're not talking about killing people. We're talking about not giving them the whole distilled truth with everything behind it. That's sophistry. And so should we become sophists? Should we become sophists to counter the sophist? Well, I would like to present you with the Republican Party. The Republican Party has, for a very long time, fully engaged in the sophistic tradition. They have fully enamored themselves, armored themselves with sophist devices in an attempt to counter the Democratic Party. I'm talking about American politics. So if you are not from the United States, basically let me distill this down to you. The Republicans currently are what might be considered classical liberals or neoliberals or a liberal party outside, but they use the word liberal to describe the Democrats, so it's all very confusing. Or they use conservatives for themselves, but they're not what conservatives would be like in Europe. They're basically the people that say they're for smaller government. The Democrats basically say they're for the welfare state. They're for helping people, right? So the Republicans realize that the socialists, like we really call the Democrats like Democrat socialists. They're like a socialist party. They know that the socialists use sophistry. They always have, because their end is, their vision determines, and I'm going to lift a little bit from Tom Sowell's Conflict of Visions. Their vision is totally obsessed with an end, and the vision of the other side is really more about means. But in the last couple decades, that party has really abandoned its former sort of obsession with reason and evidence. I'm not going to say it's an obsession. That's not correct. But they've abandoned their whole trying to convince people using evidence, and have just sort of embraced sophistry as a means to counter the sophistry of the other side, believing that like they can't succeed, and they haven't been that successful with it for obvious reasons. So all this is background to why I say we shouldn't become sophists. We should endeavor, and again I'm using the word we here, but let's say we. Let's just use it. We should endeavor. We, those of us who love reason, we should endeavor to convince people that objectivity is worthy, that it is something that we should consider, that it's something that can be determined, and it's something that that is the way that we're going to discover the truth. That without that process, you can't discover the truth. You're not going to discover the truth through divine intervention unless you're a prophet, right? And I don't know any prophets. I don't think you do either. So you're not going to discover the truth magically, right? You can only discover it through a process that confirms that something is the truth. So we have to really hope that people will listen to that idea. And there's always going to be people who literally cannot be convinced. They cannot be convinced to believe that logic, reason, evidence, all this stuff that we've been talking about, that is worthy at all. They will never be convinced. But there's always going to be some people who are like, yeah, maybe I could see that. And it's, some slight background. My very first philosophy class I took, which was really good, but like one of the first things, and it's going to be very foggy for me to remember because it's a long time ago. One of the first things like the teacher said it was like a critical thinking class. One of the first things the teacher said is like, well, this is, we're going to discuss classic logic, and this is one way to view the world, and it's not the only way that the world can be understood, and this kind of stuff. Like kind of muting all of the power of objectivity. And it's the guy was kind of a postmodernist, and there's like this postmodern perspective in some circles of philosophy that traditional logic is just one system of many of equal validity. But that's not the case. And this is a really easy way to test it, is that I am talking to you using them like through a magical box, maybe, that you can use to telepathically contact people. You might be sitting at a mass of hardware that allows you to access all human knowledge ever. How does that exist? Well, it exists because the world acts in the way that science has predicted it will act. You turn on a light switch and the light turns on. Electricity flows through that light bulb because physics exists. And physics exist because we've discovered them through the acquisition of evidence, through testing our hypotheses about reality and slowly distilling the knowledge and the truth. And we're still distilling it. We human beings, knowledge is still being distilled. It's still being discovered. We're still furthering what we understand about the world, and the applications are obvious, right? If the light bulb turns on when you flip the switch, if there's a time that you flip the switch and the light bulb turns into a snake, then you know reality doesn't conform to logical standards. But that has never happened, and I don't believe it ever will happen. We predict the future with the past. In the past, light bulb has never turned into a snake, so it will never turn into a snake. That's the negative, but it will never. I predict it will never turn into a snake for you. And if someone can be convinced to understand that little thing in our world, we're applying logic with technology and everything else that we do, then it's worthy to take a look at how that works and hopefully to arm yourself against sophistry. Right now, the last thing that I'll say, which is related to this, and I know this video is going on a little bit long, so I apologize if I've bored you at all, has to do with public education. One of the old kind of platitudes about why we have public education. In full disclosure, I am a public educator currently. Okay, so currently I do work at a public school. But one of the age-old justifications for having a public school, and I think this might have actually been in Capitalism and Freedom, like a Milton Friedman book. I think it was in this one. I think this was one of his justifications. So you want to create an educated voter block, a voter base, because every person has the capacity to vote and be in control of their government. Then they have to have like a basic knowledge set so that they can be informed enough to select their representatives and to control their government. And if people lack that basic education, they're going to be, bad voters, essentially. They're going to vote on bad things or be unable to contribute meaningfully to a civil society. And, that was a justification that appealed to me for many, many, many years. But, the proof, as they say, is in the pudding, or the proof in the pudding is in the eating. And there are no courses at the high school level, junior high level, elementary school level on logic. There's no philosophy courses. And I don't think you're going to see them in too many places. And I think the reason you're not going to see them is that when you start arming somebody against sophistry, then you've given away the greatest weapon. There's two parties. Both use sophist devices. And both have power over the public education system. I don't think they're making a very high priority over philosophy, which is probably going to be the best way to prevent people from being affected by sophistry. If we had an anti-sophist course, that would be very helpful for people, because they wouldn't be like, oh, well, this guy's just comparing someone to Hitler. That's not valid. And they would over time you'd gravitate more towards candidates. They didn't just spout these stupid little non-arguments. And I talk about politics, but we see it every day with everything else. Just politics is like a grand stage for it. So we don't have that, you know. So who's going to educate people about the virtues of objectivity? Well, you will. I will. Right? Hopefully, if you value objectivity the way I value objectivity, you'll go through the trouble of trying to convince people that objectivity is something that's valuable. And I wrote an article a long time ago, and I'll probably link it below. It's called, I had this series called The Everyday Skeptic. And the whole idea of the series was to make a series of articles and videos that were very easy to understand for people that were lay people, that weren't scientists, that weren't logicians, that had studied philosophy for 20 years. And like a really like how-to guide, like how to interact with the world and be a skeptic, and the easy way to do it. God, it was massively unpopular, and I might bring it back. You guys can check my old videos. It was a series that I tried out, a long time ago. And I realized it was so unpopular, and I wrote this article that I'll link below. It's called Our Mission Orders Have Been Flawed. Everyday Skeptic, our mission orders have been flawed. And the flawed mission orders is that I thought I could convince people through logic and evidence. I thought that was the way to convince people. And it's not. Before you can convince someone using logic, before you can bring somebody evidence, first they have to believe that evidence is worth viewing at all. And like I said, there's a huge number of people that just either don't understand it, don't value it, or will never value it. We have to make skeptics of people, and that's not an easy task. But ultimately, I think if more people really kind of think all the time, I think critically about everything they're saying, including the things that I've said in this video. And I do enjoy when people point out details that I might be wrong with, because that is only going to refine the argument, or only going to refine the way that I do things. If more people think like that, then we can have a lot more productive conversations, and also more civil conversations. Like, imagine that you could sit down and discuss socialism with someone without being called a capitalist pig, or vice versa, without being called a communist asshole or something like that. Like, imagine that you could actually sit down and discuss some ethical point like the non-aggression principle without somebody saying that you hate women and threatening to socially ostracize you. Imagine that you could do that. Well, what a fine world that would be to live in. But in order for us to live in that world, we have to make that world. And in order for us to make that world, takes a little effort, And again, I am thank you so much for watching and journey, taking this little journey with me on this particular channel. I've had a lot of fun interacting with people and talking about objectivity, things that I find very, very important in the world. And I am an artist, and I'm talking about this. And if an artist, if some dumb musician who really only needs to count to 4 can understand philosophy, well, I think anyone can. I think anyone can begin to understand this stuff and really enjoy thinking about it, and really understand where their beliefs come from. Like, do your beliefs have a solid foundation? Where's the experience for it? But anyway, yes, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Visit my websites if you wish, dvspress.com, davidvstewart.com. dvspress.com has a lot of my fiction writing, and also does have all my old nonfiction stuff, which I'm also very proud of, including, I even have an article on monetary theory for you people who like monetary theory. So thanks so much for watching, and I really, really, really do appreciate you taking the time to interact with me on this, and I'm glad that some of you have enjoyed it, and I promise there'll be more guitar content too soon, by the way. It's hard to get to it all. But yeah, have a great one, and thanks so much for watching.